It is the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George. Hey, it's still the offseason. Ohio State is still national champions. Anything
another
else that
week,
might happen?
another coordinator out of Columbus.
Good, fine. Separate the wheat from the chaff. I don't even care if Chip Kelly leaves.
This isn't a good riddance situation like last week.
No, it's not. It's not. I mean, it's definitely more amicable of a split than Jim Knowles was in Ohio State. But Chip Kelly, gone out of here. Justin Frye hit the
caught
skids.
me by surprise until I heard how much money Chip was getting.
Oh my God. Okay, yeah, we're gonna talk about that. So if you are just now hearing the news, Chip Kelly is departing Ohio State as Ohio State's offensive coordinator, leaving for the Las Vegas Raiders for $6 million a year. And so if you were at any point maybe a little angry, if you were a little angry at Chip Kelly for taking this offer, please understand it's $6 million American dollars a year.
He is now the highest paid offensive coordinator in the NFL, which given his NFL success is frankly extremely funny.
Yes, it is. So look, I understand if you're like, man, it would have been great if you would have, helped ease that transition for Ryan Day. No, not for, you got $6 million staring in the face. You kind of got to do it. So, I'm not upset about it. It definitely, it's not great. I thought Chip Kelly did an excellent job this season. When he was in his bag, man, there were a few of those games where you're like, this team is unstoppable because of what he's doing. And, stuff like in the national championship game, doing that throwback where it's like, all right, we're going to pull out this Alabama play that victimized us several years ago, and then we're going to use it to help win the national championship.
Running trips with two tight ends and the backup running back who
oh my God
is a thumper.
Oh my God. I love it. I absolutely love it. So
that first play of the Rose Bowl where they motioned G. Scott out of the backfield and threw it to him for 30 yards or something on the first play.
Well, and then, the vast amount of misdirection. I think one of the things that's always interesting to me with offensive coordinators is not just their ability to scheme up really interesting plays and get players open, but also their memories, right? Their ability to set things up later on in the game. And honestly, rewatching the national championship, that was a masterclass of that, where Notre Dame's defense, by the end of the game, felt that they had such a lock on what Ohio State was going to do, and in reality had no clue. Like, they were completely out of sorts. So Chip Kelly, as far as his ability to keep defenses on their toes, to keep them wrong-footed, misdirected, all that kind of stuff, I thought he did an excellent job this season.
Yeah, we're gonna run a broken direct snap to Jeremiah Smith, and it's gonna set up the first touchdown of the game for us.
That's right, exactly. And then we're gonna do the same thing to Emeka Buka and almost score another touchdown. So anyway, goodbye to Chip. He wasn't long for Columbus. We hardly knew ye. Also, goodbye to Justin Frye. He's out. And offensive line coach, they were talking on Reddit about this, how quickly did a fan base do a total 180 on a guy, right? And really it was like in the span of 4 weeks where they wanted Justin Frye put it into a blender, and then just a few weeks later it's like, oh my gosh, we got to hold on to this dude for continuity's sake for next season. I don't know that I'm really that broken up about it. I think we can talk a little bit about the transformation that the offensive line had to undergo, in part due to necessity, but also because, they just weren't getting it done in certain ways. But I guess
the feelings around Frye are definitely a more interesting discussion than the feelings around Chip.
Well, okay, so that's the question.
We should all be mad, or not mad, but we should all be grieving is a strong word, but it is sad to see Chip Kelly go, because Mark Davis, who always makes responsible financial decisions, threw $6 million at a guy that did not really have a lot of success at the NFL level. That being said, Frye, it was even more of a roller coaster than the last month of the season, frankly. You and I both talked about how the biggest question going into the season for Ohio State was the offensive line, particularly the depth of the offensive line.
Correct.
And one of the big reasons that the offensive line depth was a question mark is because they were not having a lot of recruiting success. Most
Also
of the talent they were getting the last couple of years was by way of the transfer portal. Now that ended up working out okay, but then they got to the middle of the season, Simmons gets hurt, and then it becomes a matter of how are they going to reshuffle this given the depth that we don't really see, at least at that point when they need to reshuffle things. He figures it out, and suddenly he's looking great again. But then McLaughlin gets hurt down the stretch of the season, and they got to figure it out again, and they don't have it figured out as well as they did the first time. And you can understand that given the fact that you lost your two best starters on the offensive line potentially.
A guy who won the Remington despite missing the last couple of weeks of the season is pretty wild.
So they, the opinion on Frye sours once again after previously being built up as early as a month prior to that, and then gets totally redeemed down the stretch of the season. And whether or not he deserves the lion's share of the credit for that is somewhat in dispute with some people. I have no problem giving it to him.
That's the question. Yeah, and that's the question I had for you, though. Like, how much of that credit do you think Justin Frye deserves for that? How much of it does Chip Kelly deserve? I mean, to me, I mean, Donovan Jackson at left tackle is obviously something that was done out of necessity, and it's not a move that you would make at the beginning of the season. But his success... he only gave up one quarterback pressure through 4 games against some of the best defensive lines in America. Either Justin Frye is like totally sandbagging as a coach, an offensive line coach up to that point where he can't coach up like Zen Mikowski and these other guys, or maybe Donovan Jackson is just really, really, really freaking good, and they didn't properly evaluate him going into the playoffs. I don't know exactly what the answer is to that. I guess my question is to you, how much of an impact do you think his loss is going to be relative to the talent that they have next year?
Well, Jackson had already been the left tackle from the Penn State game onwards. And it was that game against Penn State where he really limited the impact that people thought Abdul Carter was going to have because Ohio State was missing Simmons. And because Zen Mikowski had gotten exposed so badly against Nebraska the previous week, that Jackson's performance in that game opened a lot of eyes in terms of, wow, how good is this guy?
Right.
Now, it's been heavily speculated that given the fact that Kevin Wilson is no longer with Tulsa, that he had been hanging around the program during this playoff run, on top of the fact that his son was on the team. I don't know if he's graduated or not, but he was on the roster when they made the playoff run. K-Dub reunion with Ryan Day seems very much in the cards, particularly now that Chip Kelly is gone. But even before Chip Kelly left, it was speculated that he was probably going to be their offensive line coach. And so because he spent that time during the playoff run when they reshuffled things and the offensive line, played its best ball down the stretch, there's a lot of people that would say Wilson deserves the credit for that over what Frye does. Here's why I'm willing to give Frye the benefit of the doubt. Wilson was not there for the last 2 months of the regular season. Frye was the guy that had to figure it out with the pieces they had available. I think you would be very hard pressed to say the guy that has offensive line coach as his title did not have a hand in the offensive line figuring itself out, just on a very fundamental level. That being said, I can understand why some people would be skeptical given the first move that Ohio State opted to do when Simmons got hurt was to run Zen Mikowski out there.
Right.
And although Mikowski served admirably in relief during the Oregon game, when it came time for him to actually make his first start against Nebraska, the wheels totally came off. And given how effective Jackson was in that role the last 2 months of the season into the playoff, you wonder what happened there relative to why they didn't just go to that initially as opposed to trying to install Mikowski there. And that comes down to not evaluating the assets that they had available correctly. And that can certainly fall on Frye. So I think there's arguments both ways, but I just, on a very common sense level, I think you would be hard pressed to not say that Frye deserves praise for how he handled the difficult situation that Ohio State found itself in multiple times this season on their way to ultimately winning the national championship.
Another thing I might add in Frye's defense, and as far as the Mikulski thing goes, is that I think scheme probably factors into it a little bit as well. If they believe that they're going to continue to try to run up the middle and do some of those, zone blocking type stuff that they had been doing, maybe they're like, oh, we got to keep Donovan inside. We have to keep him there because he's going to be the most effective for what we're trying to run. And as they started to get closer to, realizing that they were a much better counter team, with the players that they had available on offensive line, but also just like the talents of Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, maybe that was also part of how they reevaluated who was going to play where on the offensive line as it went on. So, and that's not Justin Frye's responsibility. That's Chip Kelly's responsibility. That's Ryan Day's responsibility. So, and I will say this about Justin Frye, like Simmons came in and I know he was the big offensive line target, but a lot of people had reservations about that dude coming in from San Diego State. They didn't, there were a lot of knocks on him.
McLaughlin too.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, absolutely. Especially after his performance against Michigan. So these are two guys who definitely had potential. But I know PFF wasn't high on Simmons at all when he came in, especially in terms of like pass blocking, things like that. And under Justin Frye's tutelage, both of those guys, I think, improved quite a bit. So, if you want to, there are knocks on the guy. I mean, don't get me wrong. The recruiting was not anywhere near where it should be, right? But I do think in terms of overall player development, he had a lot of success stories with the guys that were there. And, again, like if you look at how the offensive line performed in the playoff, I don't know that you can 100% give all of that credit to Justin Frye, but you certainly have to give him at least some of it because they played incredibly well. Had to adjust on the fly. And I don't know. It's going to be a really interesting replacement process for both Chip Kelly and Justin Frye. I know there's a lot of candidates out there. A lot of people are talking about it. I think I shouldn't say it's inevitable because who the hell knows in this era of college football, but I feel like Kevin Wilson's name is going to be at the forefront of everybody's minds at this point. Obviously a guy who's already been in that kind of position at Ohio State as offensive coordinator, had a lot of success. Maybe, who knows? Chip Kelly wasn't at Ohio State long enough for people to sour on him, really, and like whatever tendencies people tend to pick up on. But I think Kevin Wilson did an excellent job at Ohio State, and I certainly wouldn't hate it if he was the guy who ends up becoming the offensive coordinator. Probably would hate a little bit less if he was offensive line coach and they found maybe another coordinator guy, somebody who was a little more dynamic. But
that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you're talking about potential offensive coordinator, is there anybody at the forefront of your mind, or is this just one of those things where they have to go through the process?
I haven't even had enough time to evaluate the field. Again, bear in mind, we're recording this Sunday night. The news literally, we were getting ready to go in on Frye, and then this news comes out like 3 hours maybe before we're going to start recording.
Now, with that said, there had been rumors about Chip Kelly for quite a while now, right? Like this is not a surprise by any stretch.
Honestly, based on the fact that he had been doing so many recruiting visits on Ohio State's behalf the last couple of weeks, I thought if you were a guy that was really on your way out, you would probably not be doing that much like work on behalf of the program. I would think that you would be, because let's be honest, if you've ever been in a situation professionally where you are getting ready to, you're about to jump ship for another opportunity. Look, you were lightening your load a little bit on the way
Chip
out.
Kelly is not some bum ass millennial. He's not going to quiet quit on Ryan Day. He's going to go out there and he's going to go into these kids' living rooms and he's going to take awkward pictures with kids who are 6'7". I honestly, my favorite part about this, Chip Kelly's West Coast farewell tour here that he did with all these recruits is all of the pictures that he took with him, because I've never seen Chip Kelly smile once in my life, like in live action, like on video, during games. But in these recruits, he's just grinning ear to ear, like he's having the time of his life. And maybe he was, I don't know. But
he was grinning like a man that knew he was about to get
exactly.
$6 million.
Yeah, that's right. He's grinning like a dude whose agent just called him and said, they're going to give you $6 million and you have to live in Las Vegas. It's going to be great. So anyway, happy trails to both of those guys. This is part of being a big time, college football coach. Look, if you're Ryan Day, Urban Meyer had to go through this quite a bit. Jim Tressel did not, pointedly, but you're going to have to figure out ways to replace these guys on a regular basis. And I don't know if the goal is ultimately to find a guy who's going to stick around for 5-10 years, or it is just to accept the fact that you're going to have to replace these dudes on the regular. I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. I don't know how you find a guy who's like, oh, I'm just going to stay here forever.
Well, as I said to lead off the show last week, if your goal is to be a dynasty in the mold of Alabama, you need to find the Kirby Smart to Nick Saban in this. Like, I don't know who that's
find the
Lane
Lane Kiffin to Nick Saban.
Wow, it seems like I don't want to see these guys rotate in and out, and it is the reality of coordinators in this day and age, particularly the ones that are the most successful. They're going to get opportunities to, move around. It's the nature of the coaching carousel. But I don't know who the best option to replace Chip Kelly's going to be. I don't know who the best option to replace Justin Frye's going to be, even though it would make sense that, Kevin Wilson is available and around. I will say, relative to something that you pointed out about the transfer portal talent coming in, I was starting to get comfortable towards the end of the year based on how well Simmons and Seth McLaughlin had progressed, that they were kind of starting to fall into the mold of the program of saying, look, if we're not hitting on these blue chip prospects out of high school, we're at least comfortable. And, to another point that we've spoken about previously relative to them maybe not allocating as much of the NIL share as other teams have been towards the offensive line, at least for these prospects coming out of high school, that if they're going to consistently bank on getting the most out of these transfer portal targets, of which they have two very prominent ones coming in from the most recent class by way of Rice and Minnesota, you at least have a coach that now has a track record of getting the most out of these guys coming out of the portal and turning into the best version of themselves.
Right.
The coach that you could point to for doing that is gone now. So I don't know how easily replaced that is in this new era. So I would hope that they're able to at least find someone that can do something similar to that, given the two guys that they have coming in. Obviously, it would be great if they could start finally nailing down these highly touted in-state offensive line prospects that they've been letting go to the likes of Clemson in recent years, for example. But I was starting to get comfortable with the model they had based on how they were able to make it work this year. Now we're kind of back to square one, and I don't really feel comfortable with that, frankly. So I don't know what the best answer is at this point.
No, I mean, it's fair to have some discomfort. I do think that there's some Michigan fans who are getting a little too excited about this because in trying to compare what happened to Ohio State, or what's happening with Ohio State and their coaching and what happened with Michigan last season. I would just point out that Ohio State still would have to lose their head coach, defensive backs coach, strength and conditioning coach, linebackers coach, personnel management person, and I think the recruiting coordinator for it to actually equal what Michigan lost and their head coach. Did I mention
until
their
they
head coach?
beat Michigan? Michigan can still argue that they have the advantage in the trenches because they did in the most recent game.
Well, that's true.
In spite of what Ryan Day wanted to prove.
Well, maybe that's why Ohio State needs to hire Wink Martindale and bring him home.
Oh,
oh man, no,
because it worked so well the last time they poached part of the defensive staff from Michigan to come over. Right? What's Al Washington doing these days?
I have no clue.
Is he still at Notre Dame?
You know what? I
think Laurinaitis might have replaced him.
I mean, look here. One of the things that I've always said about college football coaches is that they never not have a job, right? Like no matter how bad they are. He is a defensive line at Notre Dame.
There you go.
Yeah.
No, so they had a pretty good season.
They did. Yeah. Well, up until the last one. All right. So that's that. There'll obviously be a lot more news to come on that. Will be interesting to see who shows up and who ends up, finally getting those jobs at Ohio State. Let's go ahead and do is Ask Us Anything. But before we get into it, we do want to remind you that the Dubcast is sponsored by the Dry Goods Store at 11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers, all kinds of great stuff. Drygoods.11warriors.com. We have college football playoff items and new brand spanking new shirts in the Dry Goods Store. Definitely check them out. They are legit. They are very nice. I'm partial to the Messed with Texas shirt myself. So check them out. Drygoods.11warriors.com. Let's go ahead and do Ask Us Anything. And we remind you that you can ask us anything by sending us questions to dubcast@11warriors.com. This is from Jonathan, who says, if the national championship game was played 10 times, how many times do you think Ohio State beats Notre Dame? I think 7 or 8.
It's a tough question. Yeah, I think 8 is probably reasonable.
I think the talent disparity was just too much. And that was the thing to me. I was a little nervous at the beginning of that game. And then after I realized that Notre Dame pretty much just like shot their wad, like at the very beginning of the game, I was like, this is it. Like, that's the pinnacle. Like, again, they were doing some desperation stuff with the Gray House towards the end of the game where it was just, it was working because it had to work. It wasn't anything that they were planning. I just think top to bottom, they just did not have the dogs. Plus, I mean, with all the injuries that they had to deal with, on both sides of the field. I just think Ohio State was too much for them.
I was more nervous for Oregon and for Texas.
Same.
I wasn't I was the least nervous for Tennessee. But I still, by that point that they played Notre Dame, it's interesting because I picked Ohio State to beat Notre Dame by more than I picked them to beat Tennessee. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I was still more confident they would beat Tennessee than.
Well, it just depends on the type of teams that they're playing and what you'd see.
Well, and we hadn't seen them for 3 weeks since the Michigan game. Exactly. But I felt pretty good about the matchup, given the fact that they had definitely had the more formidable path to the title game, and just had shown more on both sides of the ball than what Notre Dame had. So I think 8 is probably reasonable. I might even go as high as 9, to be perfectly honest. I don't think you could say 10 out of 10 because, it's any given Saturday, Sunday, whatever day in this sport.
Monday.
But
Monday evening.
I felt pretty good about them given the matchup that they were going to be able to.
Yeah.
If the offense had it figured out, they were in good shape.
Yeah, one of the things that you can kind of tell where there's a talent disparity is really just the fact that the first 3 offensive drives that Ohio State had, it was just bam, 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 right? And these weren't like short drives. These were 70, 80-yard drives. And at that point, there's just, I think there's just a talent disparity that has to be taken into account. Now, that doesn't mean that the other team can't win, right? Like turnovers, other things can happen. But I just think, in general, Ohio State's offensive and defensive lines bullied Notre Dame all night.
The other thing to consider, too, is that Notre Dame couldn't have asked for a better start to the game than they got. And the results
that was the best possible start.
And the results still unfolded the way that it did. So in an instance where maybe Notre Dame wins the coin toss and opts to defer themselves and Ohio State gets the ball first, and they, they go down and score right away. Notre Dame's not in a position where they can let their quarterback run the ball 9 times and kill 10 minutes of clock. So a lot of it comes down to little script things like that that are impossible to speculate on. But I think given the way the game unfolded with what was in Notre Dame's favor early and how Ohio State responded, I feel pretty good saying at least 8 times they would have won that game.
Yeah, I'm with you. This one is from our good friend Alvin, who wants to know, who are you rooting for this Super Bowl? I know everyone's sick of the Chiefs, right?
I'm really not, to be perfectly frank.
I'm not either, honestly.
I don't understand why you ever disliked Mahomes, to be frank. I don't know how anybody dislikes that guy. Yes. I
think at one point I just didn't think that I didn't think he was as good as everybody thought he was. I was a contrarian. I was like, no, this guy, he's just running around.
Classic Ginter.
Well, I thought he was going to get exposed at a certain point. And then the years went on, and he didn't get exposed.
If I may quote Jonathan Ginter in the 11 Warriors Slack on January 26th, I used to be a huge Mahomes hater.
I was.
But I've embraced the idea that he's a witch, and there's nothing anyone can do about it.
Exactly. I thought he was a guy, he was a Johnny Manziel type who was just going to get got, right? This guy...
Johnny Manziel is a terrible comparison.
I'm aware, but my point is that I thought he was going to be a guy who would be found out in the NFL, that they would defenses would be like, this guy can't actually throw. We're just going to start.
He was a project coming into the NFL.
Right. And
that was the point I made last week about him and Randy Reed relative to Ryan Day and Will Howard. It's 2 guys that help get the most out of each other.
Yeah. And I thought that he wasn't going to get the most. I didn't think anybody was going to get the most out of him. I thought he was just going to get found out. And that has not been the case. He's just gotten better and better and better. And at this point, I just kind of have to accept it and embrace it, that this guy is a witch. There's some kind of weird supernatural power that just surrounds him, and you kind of have to just appreciate it. Like, I don't know. When I was a kid and watching, Michael Jordan and whatnot, I wasn't a huge Bulls fan, but I appreciated the fact that I was watching greatness. And that's kind of how I feel when I watch Mahomes. Like, I don't have any hatred for a guy who's that good. He's that good because he's that good, not because he gets all the breaks or all this other crap.
Yeah, it was easier for me to hate the Patriots just because Tom Brady had that Michigan element.
Right,
to
exactly.
Him.
Right.
But I remember watching that Super Bowl against the Falcons and just thinking at that point after, I was like, okay, there's no doubt. Like this guy is the best ever. And then he goes and wins another one with the Buccaneers over Mahomes.
Right.
A few years later when he's like, 43, 44?
Which is insane. Just on the face of it, that's insane.
I don't know if Patrick Mahomes is going to be able to play to that level when he's in his early 40s. I don't know if he's going to commit to drinking 38 glasses of water a day in order
and avoiding strawberries.
In order to get the same mileage out of his body that Tom Brady did. That being said, he's barely halfway into his career at this point, and he's very much on a trajectory to be the best quarterback ever. And frankly, a few years ago when he was playing his best ball, when they still had Tyreek Hill, I really had no problem saying that this guy is, like, in this moment, the highest level quarterback I've ever seen in my life. It's just insane. So I don't follow the same level of, oh my God, I hate the Chiefs and I hate that they keep winning that everybody else does. But I don't have any animosity towards the Eagles either. I mean, it's been awesome to see Saquon Barkley have the year that he's had.
My God, yeah.
I've very much enjoyed the institution that the Eagles offensive line has been for years in this league, not even relative to the meme that Jason Kelsey has become, really more of the respect for a guy like Lane Johnson, who is one of the most athletic tackles in football ever, frankly, and doesn't get nearly enough credit from, I think, casual football fans as he deserves. They're a great team in their own right. So I have no problem seeing either side win. And I'll say this too, just about the Eagles. Have you ever seen that video of after the Eagles beat the Vikings in the playoffs. And that older woman Vikings fan is like yelling in the face of the Eagles fan, and the Eagles fan is just gotta go birds, go birds. And she just keeps like, what is wrong with you? Like, you have no class in the guy. Go birds. Would never make me hate Eagles fans after that for the rest of my life. I want nothing but the best for them. So I'll be good either way. I just want good commercials because we don't get a lot of those anymore.
That's true. They kind of sucked the past few years. I'm kind of with you, man. Like, I do love the story of Saquon Barkley. I love that he's in a place that's maximizing his obvious talent. And it's funny because that's another guy, when he was at Penn State, I was like, I don't know about this guy. Like, he'll break off a 70-yard run and then he'll have 5 runs on a row where he gets nothing, or he gets, tackled for a loss. And it's because he was playing with frames with old Mr. Janklin, who had no idea what to do with this guy. And now he's in the NFL, and now he's in a place that maximizes his talent, and it's awesome, right? Like, it's just straight up awesome to watch. So I don't know. I'm just kind of appreciating greatness a little bit. And if I'm rooting for anybody, I don't know. Like, I'm rooting for whichever team is the coolest and decides to put on the most interesting display of football, honestly. I don't want to see a defensive struggle. I want to see like a 45-42 game. That's what I want to see.
I'm also, like, relative to the hater angle of both of these teams, I'm not even one of these people that thinks like the tush push should be banned.
Oh, no.
I think you find a way to stop it.
Yeah, I have no problem with that.
It's cool that they figured out this cheat code,
It is cool.
It's like,
no, I don't disagree with that at all.
Go find a quarterback that squats as much as the offensive linemen do, the way that the Eagles did, and figure out a way to stop it.
No, hell no, that's great. I have no problem with that at all. I think that's a great element in college football. I did. It's such a weird thing too, because I think every college football fan loves that because they've been clamoring. I mean, it's essentially
an NFL fan.
No, I'm talking about specifically in college football because, after the Bush push, right? When USC beat Notre Dame.
that was some BS.
No,
I mean, well, it couldn't have happened to a meaner bunch against Notre Dame, but because it was USC, But that's my point. Like, should be banned.
Right, but that's my point. If they're going to take advantage of that, I want everybody to be able to take advantage of that. I want everybody to just push their quarterback in the end zone. All right, this is from Kevin. What do you think the odds are that the men's basketball team makes and wins the NCAA tournament?
Wins? I mean, come on. What are we doing here?
Wins 0%. 0.00.
I won't put it. I'll give them a non-zero chance, but that's like a 1/1000th of a come on.
I'm giving them a 0% chance. I don't even know that they're going to make this tournament. There's a huge. I was going to talk about this in a little bit, but there's this huge squishy middle of the Big Ten this year. There's just a lot of teams that are like 13-9, 12-8, that kind of situation at this point. The biggest priority for Ohio State men's basketball right now is to somehow differentiate themselves from like 10 other teams, and they've got 10 games to do it, so it's possible, but they're not going to be able to do it by getting 4 points off the bench. And having Parrish and Bradshaw like contributing, I think like a total of 6 points between them and doing nothing the rest of the game. You can't just win with 3 dudes, I guess is my point. And so to make the tournament, if I'm putting odds on it, I don't know, like 25%.
I think they're going to need to win the Big Ten tournament in order to make the tournament at this point.
You think so? Yeah. I don't know that they'd have to win the entire Big Ten tournament. I don't think it's that dire.
They've got some good wins, but I mean they're 13-9 right now. How many more games are they going to lose?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like,
you think they're going to win? You think they're going to get 7 more wins against this Big Ten schedule, given how inconsistent they've been on the road?
I think they have to. Well, I guess I don't think they have to, but my point is that I think if they did, they would be in. I don't think they're going to, but I'm saying that it is possible for them to get a berth via the next 10 games that they have, right? If they perform to that level, I think they're fine. They're in.
I just have a tough time seeing them go 7-3.
Oh, I don't think they're going to do it. But I'm saying if they did do that, then that would I think that would be enough. I think they'd be okay. That's the goal. I don't see that happening either. I don't think they have to win the Big Ten tournament, but they got to get above. They got to do 20 plus wins. I would say 21 wins, 22 wins, just on the schedule that they have.
Still got to play Michigan twice, and that's going to be.
That's going to be brutal.
There's going to be some feelings.
The takes will be hot.
They really got to win at least. They got to at least split. If they lose both of those games, especially if they lose both of those games and then Michigan gets in the tournament and
Michigan's probably getting in the tournament too. That's the other thing that's really going to suck about that. Like Michigan's not a great team this year, but I would bet I would put much higher odds on them getting in the tournament than Ohio State.
I think I'd probably agree with that.
Yeah. Women are 20-1. The women's basketball team's killing it. They're obviously getting in the tournament. Them winning it, I'd have to see them get like beyond like the semifinals or whatever. But they got as good a shot as they've always had. I mean, they've played incredibly well this season. They should be, honestly, I would say anything less than a Final Four is a disappointment for that team. They played incredibly well. So hopefully they continue doing what they've been doing. All right, last one here. This is from Joshua F. What is your top 5 all-time sports players villain list as a fan?
Oh, I mean,
we don't have to do 5, but give me a couple like your worst villains of all time, the guys you just absolutely hated.
I can't do this in any particular order off the top of my head. I mean, Brady's definitely up there.
Yeah.
The Ohio hive mind. It's funny. If you go read the Apple reviews for this show, there's like all of the ones. There's only like 2 or 3 that have come in since I took over. A lot of them we have almost I think it's 4.3 out of 5 is our average review out of like 250 reviews on there, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
But a lot of the negative reviews come from before I came in, and are more critical of things not necessarily related to the sports discussion from previous Dubcasts, but the ones that pertain to us in particular. One of the ones from right after I took over was very, very upset with the fact that I was an outright LeBron hater on what is effectively an Ohio sports show.
Sure.
I think most people in this listening audience are not willing to concede the fact that when this guy left Cleveland the first time, this guy that was the last time the NBA, I think, was at its most interesting, was LeBron's run with the Heat. Because that guy,
his villain era was incredible.
The whole league was so irate with that dude.
Yeah.
And I put him up there in the top 5. And obviously, I'm still big time hater, especially given recent developments that we may or may not talk about here in a sec. But I would put him up there in that top 5. And I know that there's probably some people listening like, oh my God, he's such a Jordan supremacist. And he's why does he hate LeBron so much? He's so great. Look what he did for Cleveland. Like, go back to 2011.
Who cares? Yeah, that's not.
Go back to 2011 when this guy left Cleveland the first time before they had a title, and remember how much people in Ohio hated this dude.
Give me a break. Yeah, people wanted his head on a pike. It was crazy.
So Brady and LeBron are both in there for me. It's tough to come up with some other one. Let me see if I can rack my brain for another 3, but why don't you give me some of yours?
I don't know that I can give you 5, honestly, but I will say as a kid, I grew up a Cincinnati Reds fan, and just name an Atlanta Braves pitcher. Like seriously, like Tom Glavine, John Smoltz.
Oh, Smoltz drove me crazy.
Greg Maddux. And Greg Maddux, by the way, is like my all-time favorite pitcher, just as an actual technician. I mean, as someone who genuinely loves baseball, I think I got more fun out of watching Greg Maddux than any other pitcher. But those guys just seemed to, anytime the Reds got even slightly good, it felt like one of those guys was there just to destroy their dreams. And since they haven't won a playoff series since 1995. That 1995 team beat, I think, the San Diego Padres in the first round of the MLB playoffs, and then the freaking Braves comes in and their starting lineup just annihilates the Reds. So, those three guys, Tom Glavine, John Smoltz, Greg Maddux, they were huge villains for me as a kid. Tim Biakabatuka, a guy that I had never heard of, ruined my entire fall when I think it was when I was 11.
Yeah,
that was awful. That Jesus Christ, like that's one of the first like truly deeply angering moments that I had as a fan. I think it was 11 years old, and that's the first time I can remember just being irate at something happening on television with regards to sports. Those guys are pretty high up there. Those were formative villainous events in my life, but especially Tshimenga Biakabatuka, just destroying my hopes and dreams.
I think for my college one, I think I would go with Tim Tebow.
That's a good one.
Which is hilarious. Really good one.
I hated Tim Tebow.
He's like the opposite of a villain in terms of personality, but
everything about him seems so smarmy.
Media darling and like just, oh my God.
Yeah, he's up there for me too. Oh man.
Drove me absolutely insane. And then I'm a Bears fan, and you remember the game that extended his NFL career was when Marion Barber fumbled the ball. And Tebow was able to go on he was able to then go tie the game and then win the game, I think, in overtime after that. And then everyone's like, oh my God, he's doing it at the NFL level too. And then against the Steelers, I think it was, he had that touchdown pass to Demaryius Thomas, right? That won that game for them in the playoffs.
Yeah, he had like 2 good games in his entire NFL career. And I think they victimized both of your teams that you root for.
I could not stand him. It just drove me absolutely insane. So he's definitely up there.
Dang, that's a good choice.
I had another one right before I thought of Tebow. You don't have any other ones other than the Braves pitching conglomerate and
Tim Biakabatuka,
Michigan running back.
The thing is, though, if you're an Ohio State fan, if you're an Ohio State basketball fan, if you're an Ohio State football fan, I mean, who?
Oh, I remember the other one I wanted to say, and then I'd need to think of one more. But you know who? I can't believe you didn't think of this because you're a Bengals fan.
Oh, well, there's a lot of
Vontaze Burfict.
Yeah, Vontaze Burfict's a really good.
The most universally despised football player of my lifetime. Yeah. I don't even think it's close.
Yeah, that's actually a really good one. I forgot about that. I was actually going to say Kimo Van Olhoffen, but Vontaze
I don't know
Burfict,
who that is.
He's the guy who rolled up on Carson Palmer's ankle and destroyed it, and then forced John Kitna to try to lead.
Gotcha. Okay.
But yeah, Vontaze Burfict is an excellent choice. I had totally forgotten about that, but yes, 100%. One of the dirtiest players in the history of the game. Just awful human being. Yes, holy crap, that's a great one for so many people, not just me. Honestly, there's a lot of people who would put him on the list, I think. That's wild. I mean, but like I said, if you're a Ohio State sports fan, Ohio State's last 20 or so years has been overcoming these adversarial coaches and players. Like Dabo sucks, but like my last memory of Ohio State playing Dabo is, putting him in a pine wood box and like shipping him off to, the depths of the sea. Like what, like, how can I be still angry about that?
Right.
The last time they played him, they annihilated him. So, same with like, Nick Saban or something like Nick Saban got him in like the COVID year or whatever, but I don't care. Like it's not, not something that keeps me up at night.
Everybody likes glamorizing him just because of the respect, but I mean, I'll say Nick Saban. I'll put Nick Saban in there.
Fair enough.
He was reign of terror across college football for almost 2 decades.
Yeah, as a general, like just villain in college football, I think you could say that. I used to really hate Nick Saban, and then like the longer he went on, the less I like really hated the guy. As far as coaches, like there are definitely other coaches that made me much more angrier than Saban did. I think
it's just too many people came to begrudgingly respect him because of all the success that he had.
Right. He kept winning, and it's the same thing that we just said with Tom Brady and
but it's
Mahomes.
Like how many other college football coaches could have reached that level of success if they had the sort of institutionalized corruption up to the state government that Alabama does?
You know what? So many Alabama coaches before had the same institutionalized corruption and couldn't pull it off. So what does that say? if who Dave Shula or whatever one of the Shulas that coached Alabama before Nick Saban took it over, if only he had stayed at Michigan State.
Nick Saban, Vontaze Burfict, Tom Brady, LeBron James, and Tim Tebow. I think that was my 5.
That's good. I think that's a good 5. All right, that's Ask Us Anything. Thank you guys for sending in those questions.
Oh, wait. Chaz has written in. Oh my goodness.
Sorry, a late breaking Ask Us Anything from Chaz.
We love hearing from you, Chaz.
Yes, from the very real Chaz. The very actual existing human being of Chaz. Yeah.
Chaz says, sorry it took so long for me to get back, dope chillers of the Dubcast.
Oh, man. Where you been, Chaz?
He's been celebrating Ohio State's national championship victory.
Right. He's been on a pontoon boat in South China.
He said, I've been in a K-hole watching highlights from the 2024
hanging out with his bro Elon
season.
Musk. Yeah,
exactly. But he said, I came out to return because I have to ask you, Johnny and George, but particularly George is a esteemed appreciator of LeBron James. What do you make of the latest blockbuster deal in the NBA between the Lakers and the Mavs?
It's the funniest thing ever, and it's also the dumbest thing ever, which is why it's the funniest thing ever. Let's trade a guy let's trade an injury-prone 32-year-old for like an MVP caliber 25-year-old. That's cool. Let's do that. That's a smart idea. That makes us good at basketball.
Unbelievably shameless. And the thing is, I've totally divested from like genuinely caring about the NBA for probably the last going on almost like 7 years at this point. Because I used to write about the Bulls from the time that I was an upperclassman in college to around 2018, 2017, when I finally pivoted to doing Ohio State football and then ultimately wound up here. This is worse than the Pau Gasol trade. This is worse than the Chris Paul trade.
There's no worse trade. There's no worse trade.
There's no comparison.
This is the worst trade. And the
fact that the morning and afternoon, the Sunday after the news breaks late at night, that the media spin that went into trying to make this deal palatable to the public, that there was some sort of justification for like, sorry, like, because it ends up coming out too that Luka didn't request this trade. They're just trying to speculate that there was some sort of disgruntled disagreement between Luka and the Mavs front office. Luka can't get a supermax now because of this deal. Right.
So why would he? He wants nothing to. And it's a good trade when the first thing that happens when someone announces it is that they think their Twitter got hacked.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. When a journalist has to say, yes, no, this is real when I'm reporting.
I have not been hacked. I'm actually reporting news. This is real life.
The thing that I think speaks to the entire situation is Mark Cuban's no longer the majority owner of the Mavericks. He sold his stake at the end of 2023. At the beginning of 2023, he said, if it came down to my wife or Luka Doncic, you would find me at my lawyer's office filing for divorce. That says it all about how wrong this is.
Yeah.
And then you get into the angle that the new Mavs GM had no prior front office experience in the NBA and spent his entire career as an executive at Nike. Who's the face of Nike basketball for the last 15, 20 years, if I recall correctly?
Well, you got to.
It's almost like there would be a vested interest in that company. The guy on the Lakers who was previously the best player prior to this trade.
Right.
Isn't it interesting how these things work?
Yeah, Yeah, it's ludicrous and stupid, and it's definitely going to go through because Adam Silver's a wuss and he's not going to block it like he should.
Yeah, he ain't. David Stern ain't rolling out of his grave
Right.
and walking through that. He is rolling over in his grave.
Yeah.
He would have absolutely vetoed this the way he did the Chris Paul trade.
Right.
And frankly, was totally justified.
Of course it was. And this is obviously even more justified. It's stupid and one-sided and it makes no sense. And again, like I'm really glad that you brought up the whole media trying to carry water for this thing angle, because it's really stupid. Like it's like you're telling fans, right, that like they're not pissing on your head, it's rain, right? Like that's really what it comes down to, is that they're trying to tell fans to deny all evidence to the contrary, that this is an insane, stupid trade. And that's probably one of the most annoying things about it, is that like everybody knows, even casual NBA fans like myself understand how ridiculous this is. So if that's the case, clearly there's something amiss here. Please not try to convince us otherwise.
I think the other angle here too is the reason they're being complicit in justifying this is because it's, one of the biggest stories of the last, like, I won't say calendar year, but just the last 12 months or so has been the shocking decline of ratings for the NBA, for basketball. Right. The league needed a jolt. This is a jolt.
Yeah.
But this is a jolt that reeks to high heaven, not an organic jolt.
Yeah.
And so the media, who obviously, for the purpose of getting more eyeballs on their coverage in general of the sport, not just this story, has to be complicit in justifying how it took shape as opposed to just reporting the facts on it.
Right.
It stinks.
It does stink.
I hope that the response from fans has been very pointed on this, and I hope that I hope it remains consistent, and that the narrative as time goes on doesn't change.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so that's Ask Us Anything.
Thank you, Chaz, for bringing this to our attention.
Thank you for the Chaz for writing, and the Chaz who definitely exists and is not a figment of our imagination.
Chaz with two Z's.
Chaz with two Z's. A couple things we got to hit on before we get out of here. First of all, Michigan did respond to the notice of allegations, finally, to the NCAA. Quote, accusing them of, quote, grossly overreaching, and they're going to fight this, which is, by the way, the right move, right? You always fight the NCAA. There's no reason to ever roll over and accept their punishment. That's stupid. However,
when you hang your hat on producing great minds in the legal space like Ann Coulter, you have to, stick up for yourself in terms of challenging things in court. Do you
look,
not?
Billable hours? Okay, you gotta keep going. So, 137 page response. Most of it is just saying, so what? Like, that's pretty much what it boils down to. That's really kind of Michigan's response. It's like, yeah. And my favorite part about the response, though, is Sherrod Moore saying that, in the process of deleting all of his texts from Connor Stalions, that was not a defensive move or an attempt to conceal evidence. Quote from Moore, I wasn't trying to hide anything. It was just that I was extremely angry of the type of person that would do that to this program and these kids. So that's why he deleted these texts in a fit of rage. And the way that it's been portrayed by Michigan fans and Michigan media is that, Michigan voluntarily turned these texts over, right? That, obviously, of course we would cooperate. We have nothing to hide. That's, of course, not what happened. Sherrod Moore deleted it from his phone thinking that they were all gone. And then the NCAA then had to image his phone to recover the text. It wasn't a situation.
Nah, man. He was emotionally unstable. That's why he broke down after the Penn State game.
Right. So this is not a case of Michigan, voluntarily turning over this information to the NCAA because they know that their hands are clean. It's because this information was found out because the NCAA then took an extra investigative step to find this information that Michigan, namely Sherrod Moore, tried to conceal from them. So that's a totally different thing. And I think that's honestly what the NCAA right now is most pissed about. Now, again, in the process of all of this, being fought over and whatnot, they're going to have to go through the process of, hearings and all this other crap. And we'll see how long it actually takes. But not only does Michigan say that what happened wasn't that big of a deal, which is an interesting, defense, but also they really want to know who leaked this to the NCAA in the first place. So it's interesting that A, they don't know who it is. B, it's not Ryan Day's brother running some kind of investigatorial scheme, according, which has been
according to the Michigan beat.
Yeah, right. And C, the call is coming from inside the house. So that's really interesting to me. And ultimately, I don't really know what punishments or punishment the NCAA is considering for Michigan. A lot of these commentators, people who would know, seem to be focusing most of this on Sharon Moore, the coach, rather than Michigan football, the program, in terms of potential punishments. So, less bowl bans and scholarship losses and vacated wins, and more like, show causes and suspensions and fines and stuff like that. I don't know if that's accurate or not. We'll find out. But it does strain credulity that it's just something that Connor Stalions was doing and nobody else knew about. Now, they do talk about in the NCAA's notice of allegations that, a lot of these other Michigan coaches were like, oh, this dumbass is running around doing his stupid little sign stealing thing or whatever. I don't know what that suggests about the culpability of the rest of the coaching staff, but at least they knew about it. So I don't know what happens from here, but it's going to be really interesting, I think.
Well, a couple things. Number one, if the call was coming from inside the house, so to speak, doesn't that kind of prove in its own way that people on staff knew this was happening? Because it's not like this was a self-reported thing.
Yeah, right.
It's not like somebody
did.
Right. So if somebody inside knew about this and became the insider for the NCAA for tipping off this investigation, then at least one other person with familiarity of the staff knew this was happening.
Exactly.
So in that way, it kind of already proves itself relative to whether Moore was culpable or not, which, I mean, let's face it, at this point, the guy, whether he should have known it was happening, whether or not he knew it was happening. But, what I'm most grateful for with these recent developments is after Michigan beat Ohio State, and even going into that before, the big thing that Michigan fans kept saying to Ohio State was like, do you guys really still care about this? Have you not moved on yet?
No.
You need to just get over it.
You'll never move on.
We were insistent, even after Ohio State lost to Michigan.
Yeah.
I got on with Jason and Chris and Ramsey, and we had that round table that David Portnoy retweeted.
Yeah, right.
About, how there was that one clip of Jason making the case that, how much of the wins from 2021 and 2022 can you put on the contributions that Stalions made? Like 1.5 million people saw that on Twitter, and everybody's like, oh, they can't get over it. They're forever. They're never going to be able to live it down. And they Ohio State had totally lost in that narrative after losing this most recent game in the public perception. Yep. Like, it looked like that we were the only ones that still cared about this. And it very much felt like what had happened was getting out of control, that history was being written by Michigan as opposed to by the truth or by the teams and schools that were supposedly victimized by what happened here. I was very, very encouraged that when this response came out, that so many fans from schools beyond the ones that were the most supposedly implicated in this, or that were rivals of Michigan, such as Ohio State and Michigan State, were very transparently either upset or making fun of the fact that Michigan, it looks like they are basically dead to rights on this issue.
Right.
A great example is, the very coy tweets that Brett Bielema was putting out relative to
Brett Bielema. One of the best trolls, and
he's great.
Yeah, in college football, a really
I'm
gross
nervous
person.
for that Illinois game next year,
Oh
man.
my god, a really gross person in general, but just the fact that he's willing to be out there, and people forget low key how much he hates Jim Harbaugh and
Yeah.
Michigan in general. But Brett Bielema was always there for good scrap with those dudes, and
Yeah.
it's really funny.
Gross with or without his shirt off.
Oh
But
yeah, baby.
I although who am I to talk on that? But that
Who
being
among
said,
us?
whomst among us.
Yes.
But it feels like, for the point that Michigan fans wanted to make ever since this story came out about who really cares about this, it turns out a lot of people
Yeah.
actually care. And a
Yeah.
lot of people beyond Ohio State care. And now the microscope is firmly fixed on them from a national perspective,
Right.
and it'll be interesting to see what comes out. I know we've got to move on to our next subject before we wrap up the show, but what I do want to ask you, Johnny, is you've previously, the last time we talked about this, you said you were not optimistic that any sort of significant punishment was going to be levied against Michigan. Right. Does this recent development and the national narrative shift around it make you feel any differently now than you did a short time ago?
A little bit. I mean, honestly, the truth of the matter is that it does. I think the NCAA does take in some of this national perception a little bit into how they, not just prosecute things, but how they tend to publicize their investigations, how they talk about it to the media, how they leak things, all that kind of stuff. I think that does matter to them. So the fact that it's still at the forefront of people's minds and it's still getting that kind of attention, I think that's significant. I think that does say something about, what's going to happen and things like that. Now, with that said, I do think that some of the more dire predictions for what's going to happen to Michigan in terms of punishments, or, what the NCAA is proposing, is probably still a little misguided. Again, I think it'll be probably targeted more towards Sharon Moore than anything else. But I do think that it's possibly going to be a lot bigger than nothing, which is honestly basically what I expected at a certain point. So I would, it does feel significant that the NCAA is going after this as hard as they are, and also feels significant that Michigan was as like in this 137 page response, like they're like, don't hit me. It doesn't feel like the stance of an institution that feels like they have got this thing licked. You know what I mean? It almost feels like it's a stance of somebody like saying, hey, just don't, not in the face. You know what I mean? Like that's really kind of what their response.
Yeah, if you're
like.
truly innocent of any wrongdoing, you wouldn't have to filibuster to that extent.
No. And you wouldn't be saying stuff like, hey, who told you? Right? We didn't do anything wrong. And, who told you all that stuff?
And also tell us who told you so we
can right, exactly.
Like vengeance upon them.
That's right. So it feels very reflexively weak coming from them. And that's interesting. That's very interesting to me. So we'll see how that plays out.
One more question, because this is continuing to be speculated. This was more of a detail that was more relevant to the immediate fan bases. And now that this story is back in the cycle again, more people are paying attention to it now in the national scope. Do you actually think the Matt Weiss computer crimes are affiliated with this in any way?
I don't.
No, you think it's a separate issue?
I think it's a separate issue. I mean, people have speculated on what it could be, and I don't think the FBI is involved, and there hasn't been any kind of information coming from them about it. I don't think they're related. I think it's two separate issues.
Okay.
But I have no idea. I mean, I couldn't even begin to speculate what these computer crimes are about. I know that some of the rumors is that he got into somebody's email and did something else, but that wouldn't be a case for the FBI. So who the hell knows? But that's one of those things, honestly, that we may never get a satisfactory answer to. So we'll see how that plays out.
Okay.
A couple of things before we get out of here. Men's basketball, we already mentioned a little bit. They just lost in a very Holtmanian fashion, is what I wrote down in the notes.
That was tough.
They blew it in the second half. Big lead just evaporated, and then they lost. But it's 3 wins in a row right before that looked great. So
I will say, you criticized the bench scoring. I still I don't know how much they're going to be able to get out of their rotation at this point. I just think that I said going into the season that I thought Meechie Johnson was going to be the X factor, and Meechie's not there anymore. No. But the guy that has taken his place has sort of become the X factor for the team.
Right.
John Mobley has played very well in the games that they've won. And in like 4 of the last 5 games he's not played well, they've ended up losing. And even if you hold what happened against Illinois as a loss, because they didn't end up losing by 1 possession, if you go back to the Michigan State game and the Oregon game and the Wisconsin game, 2 of those games, which were 1 possession losses, the Michigan State game was fairly close. It ended up being like something like an 8-point loss. But if John Mobley plays a little bit better in those games, this is a team that is 16-6 instead of 13-9, and they have 3 more wins against ranked teams.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a team that I think you feel much, much, much more confident about making the NCAA tournament, regardless of what happens in the conference tournament.
Right.
And it just goes to show you how close this team is to being one of those really good teams in the field, but they're just not quite there. There's just something that leaves a little bit desired. And it's just leaving it up to a freshman to need to play that much better, who probably, I don't even know if he anticipated fielding as much of a role as he has coming into this season.
Probably
so
not.
I think that there's going to be a lot of conversations, regardless of how their season plays out from here, about what they were able to do relative to expectations. I do think we're probably going to need another year in light of what has happened to figure out what Diebler's long-term fit is going to be with getting the most out of this team, because it's been a weird season, but they're so close to being really, really good. Just they haven't been able to hit their stride with consistency, but the margins at the same time have been so slim in terms of being in that upper echelon.
Well, they've got 10 really regular season games to try to pull it out and I guess reverse, some of those outcomes that you saw, right? They're going to play some close games here. So they
had a much better January than they had in recent years under
Absolutely.
Holtman.
Absolutely. So we'll see what happens in the last month here of the season. I'm not super optimistic that they're going to be able to get it done, but
just
stranger
beat
things
Michigan once, please.
Oh, I'd love that.
That's all I want.
That's kind of where I'm at. That would be the pinnacle of my expectations right now. By the way, last thing, if there are 2 teams that you want to get emotionally invested in, women's basketball and women's hockey continue to kick ass. So, and hey, men's wrestling, I think number 4 in the country right now.
Speaking of a team that did
men's
beat
hockey,
Michigan.
That's right. They annihilated Michigan in wrestling just a couple days ago. So, yeah, definitely. There's a lot of Ohio State sports to enjoy and keep an eye on. So do that as we get into the spring here in the next couple months. And we're going to keep talking about them. So that's it for this week. We'll be back next time to talk about all the comings and goings of Ohio State sports. But until then, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.